Welcome to In the Telling. I'm Stephen G. Forwood.
And I'm Miranda Mims, and we are the co-founders of the Nomadic Archivist Project.
And today on the In the Telling, our guest today is Christopher Stahling. He was born and raised in Harlem. He's the owner of Fortitude Sun. He's a community worker, a thinker, and a lover of life. Christopher, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are y'all?
We're very good. Your bio was deliberately short because I wanted to let you talk about yourself. It's something that you do very well. No shade.
Do I do it very well? I don't know.
You do it very well. Yes, you're very clear, and I think this podcast will demonstrate that. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
As you said, I'm Christopher Stahling. I was born and raised in Harlem. I'm 32 years old. I'm an artist, a cook, own my own catering company. I'm also a life coach. What else about me? I love history. I love being Black, and I'm gay as fuck.
I like that for you because we've talked about your grandmothers, the influence of both your grandmothers in your life. I thought it might make a really good story for In the Telling because of not only because of the influence in your life, but also the way you talk about them. And I've heard the story a couple times, and I wanted to know if you could introduce your grandmothers, tell us a little bit about who they are.
So my mother had me at 19, and my father's mother, who I didn't know was my grandmother, blood at that point, took my mother in. And my mother's mother, so we use names, my paternal grandmother, Thelma Furman, lived on 115th Street in St. Nicholas Avenue. And my mother got pregnant. She took my mother in and basically watched me for 5 years while my mother went to work. Okay. My maternal grandmother, Ethel Stahling, lived in Harlem as well, but wasn't really stable the same. So,
were both of your grandmas, your grandmothers from Harlem as well? Were they born there?
No. So, actually, I found out. So, I was told as a kid they were from Harlem, and they had been in Harlem for so long. I want to say since the 40s, they had been in Harlem, or 50s since they've been in Harlem. Excuse me. So, I didn't actually know where they were from. There was a story I was told on my father's side by my cousins around them having a house in Virginia. So I thought that she might have been from there, and some of her sisters live in North Carolina or Virginia now. But as far as I knew growing up, they were all from New York.
Okay.
All from Harlem. Some of them in the Bronx, some of them in Yonkers, Westchester, but a majority, almost all of them from Harlem. My mother's mother, Ethel, always said she was from Harlem, had lived here her whole life. But I knew that from my mother told me she was adopted. So on her birth certificate, it says that she was born in Long Island to two parents, and when her father was from Little Rock, Arkansas. But I think because my family members didn't know how to read her birth certificate or didn't understand how it was written. But I found the copy of it randomly because the person I used to live at had a copy of her birth certificate, my Ethel's birth certificate, and it showed that her father was from Arkansas. He moved up to Long Island from my great grandmother and had my grandmother, and that was it. So I don't know how she got adopted or when that take place or whatever. I just did. I knew that my grandma was adopted. So
your grandmother, Christopher, your grandmother was adopted, yet she had a birth certificate?
Yes.
Okay.
Ethel had a birth certificate. So my on my mother's side, Ethel's side of the family, our family is very small and very immediate. So my Ethel had 6 children. My mother is one of them. Youngest of 6, and that was it. So what I know about my family's lineage prior to my grandmother Ethel is very limited. I found out because I found her birth certificate within the last year or two about her father and his name. But
so is Stahling? You told me once before that the spelling of Stahling was wrong on the gift.
So I didn't know it was wrong until one time. I remember when I was 10, not 10. I want to say when I was little. She's always say, well, when I was a kid, we were colored. Okay. And they couldn't read my handwriting, so Stahling is made up. I was like, who makes up last names? And then when we did Ancestry.com, my aunt did an Ancestry.com thing a couple of years ago, like 10 years ago, before DNA tests was popular. She was like, "Oh, trying to find people with the same last name on Ancestry.com," and nobody has the same spelling of our last name. Most people's spellings of last name was Stallings.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it might be like 4 other people in the world, but I feel like we're the only 10 people in the world who have that last name.
Okay.
It's
Wow.
basically made up.
And
But
you
my
think that
father's
it
side
was
is different.
probably somebody misreading the
But also,
lineage?
there's probably also too, I don't know much about her adoption, so I don't even know I don't even know if the names on her birth certificate are her actual parents or her adopted parents. I'm not sure.
Okay.
My family members don't tell the bad stuff often, or the things that seem kind of like untouchable or unsavory. So,
Okay.
like my eldest aunt had her the daughter at 16. She doesn't talk about that often, but if you do the math between my oldest cousin and my oldest aunt, they about 15 years apart, 16 years apart. And she sent her daughter down to her grandmother and raised her in South Carolina, and she came up in middle school. This whole thing. So I know these stories. When my mother was young, so my mother explained things to me very early around like how people are family and what happened to who, and it usually came up when somebody got into a fight. When somebody got into a fight, something happened, I would ask, she would explain to me, well, this is why so-and-so's mad so-and-so. Right? So my grandmother died when I was 10. My Ethel and my oldest aunt got into a fight on the highway.
Wait, Christopher. Who died at 10?
My grandmother. Both my grandmothers died at 10. Ethel and Thelma both died at 10. Ethel died in August 20th, that's my birthday. And Thelma died December of the same year. This is 97.
Mm-hmm.
So I was told this story around how old my cousin and how old my aunt was when she had my cousin, because my aunt had made a comment to my grandmother about somebody else. My grandmother said she should mind her business because she had kids too young. And I was like, what? And I didn't even ask. My mother then told me later the story around my Aunt Terry's having children. So back to my grandmother, there isn't much known about who she was before she was their mother.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but on my father's side, Thelma's side, their generations go back further. And because I'm not necessarily close to, I grew up with them, although I wasn't, I didn't know who my father was until I was 12 officially. But Thelma, but my Aunt Sue and my mother were childhood friends that grew up together as little girls from like the time they were 7 years old until as adults. So their family and my family were always kind of attached to each other, even though, even before I came around. So Thelma taking my mother in at 19 wasn't necessarily more about, I think you're my son's day mother. It was more about like, oh no, you are my daughter's friend. You're a family friend, taking in that kind of thing. So my point is sharing that like there are things in our family that people don't know because when we ask them as adults now, nobody remembers. And the people who could answer the question are both dead. I've been dead 20 years, and so I only know what I've been told, what I've asked, and what I've acquired, pieced it together over time.
I see. Do you feel as you're getting older and that they're getting older, that they're more willing to kind of tell you things, or is it roughly about the same as it was when you were a child?
They were always willing to tell us stuff. It's really about the engaging in
the
interest.
Knowing
and engaging in interest too, because there's some shame around them not knowing certain things. Like my grandmother Ethel had 6 kids by 4 different men, and 2 of them had the same father, who was a white man named I can't remember the last name, Calloway. So I don't think any of them know their father, like personally, or grew up with their father. So when you ask them questions around like just not even just it's like who's your father, what's your dad's name? I think my mother doesn't know. My mother doesn't know her dad's name. Or know him personally. I don't think she never met him before, and she doesn't talk about him. And I make jokes. I make jokes about it all the time because my mother looks like she's from the Caribbean. She looks like she can be Dominican or look like she's from some island. She goes, "Well, I don't know my father's. Maybe I was. I'm not sure." But
And
that narrative,
you've never seen her birth certificate.
no.
Okay.
I asked for it once because she had had a cancer scare. I want to say 5 years ago. So I was like, well, I need so I already know what all the documents are comes to like life insurance stuff that happens to her. But I was like, well, I don't have a birth certificate. She was like, oh, why do you need it? I was like, I don't have a copy of it. I have a copy of it. You're getting older. I'm getting older. I have a copy of it. And she was very resistant to that. She was also a hoarder. So she was also a hoarder. So she has a hard time with finding things because she can't pinpoint where it's at.
Right. Okay.
You talked a lot about Ethel. Can you talk a little bit about Thelma? A little bit more about
So
Thelma?
Thelma is the one who I spent the most time with. Although it was kind of equal. But I'm coming to living with her until I was 5. My mother and I shared a room with my grandma's house until I was 5. So my mother moved out. So Thelma was, I guess, more formative because I spent a lot of time with her. So the way she talks, her wit, she cooks. She's a community person. She's a healer that way. So a lot of the things that I do are wrapped up in Thelma. Ethel is probably the reason why I'm smart because she always read the paper. She was super civically engaged and minded and super involved in politics in New York City. So we learned Black history and learned Harlem's history and learned civics from Ethel. We learned how to love and how to build community and how to like stay together as a family from Thelma. They both also were very close. I did the last 3 years of their lives. They lived together in the same house. So Thelma used to work at / own a restaurant in Harlem called Adele's, which is now closed. The woman is on the name of it is Adele Griffin, who's still alive. When she died, when the restaurant closed, I want to say it had been closed in the 80s because I was born in 87, so it must have closed in 88, 89, I'm not sure. But it closed in the 80s, and when it closed, Thelma's house became like the pseudo restaurant because everybody was always over there on Sunday eating. And she fed everybody, like homeless people, drug dealers, she fed everybody. So we were used to this kind of this community collective thing that we did. And my father's family is also a lot more communal in general. Like they'll invite strangers over to their house all the time and like people to meet in the street for dinner, like that's how they are. That's also how I grew up.
So you said Thelma actually used to walk you around the neighborhood and take you to meetings as a kid. Can you talk a little bit about that?
That was Ethel. So Ethel was the one that took us to the rest. So Ethel was a part of all the community boards, all the Democratic clubs in Manhattan and Harlem. She also was the regional director for the polling stations, poll workers in I want to say in New York City or Manhattan, I'm not sure. But when she died, the funeral was super packed. I didn't get why it was so packed. And there were a lot of dignitaries there, and I didn't know why. I didn't get why they were there, but they were like the maid was there. There was a lot of people at the funeral, and I didn't understand why until I got old enough to. My grandmother knew all these people. She helped people get elected, like kind of thing. So when election day, election day, I would walk with her up and down Harlem from Hudson Street to 55th Street to the old station and kind of check on everybody and stuff. So I remember that very vividly. Because I remember hating walking with her, and I remember her just dragging me around. I remember her dragging me around and telling me, like, "Carry your ass on," like so. It just, but also I learned I had a walking history of Harlem and brownstones and how they were built, and when black people moved in, and why this is black is important, who's this person, who's Marcus Garvey, and why the names of the street what they are. Like I learned all this stuff from my grandmother. Although my cousins didn't get any of this stuff, which is crazy, but I think me being queer allowed me more time with my grandparents because my other cousins were active, social, had other things they did, so they weren't in the house. I was always in the house with my grandmother, both of them, either with Thelma or with Ethel. And my mother being younger, they were also reserved for childcare. So when I got old enough to go to school by myself, I did. That's at the 1st, 2nd grade. My school was running from my house, and my grandmother would come and check in, like, "Oh, did you eat? You okay?" That kind of thing. Ethel took me to church with her all the time. So when there was too much time for me being idle in the house, I was ended up with Thelma. I mean with Ethel, and when it was time to like eat or do some like family thing off with Thelma, so kind of like I had dual time with both of them. What I later found out too that Ethel was not emotionally stable. She had like a couple of nervous breakdowns, was going through a lot. So the version of my grandmother I got, my mother didn't get. So she was like a fantastic great grandma, super available and present, and like always helping do stuff. But she wasn't like that with my mother.
I'm just curious. You said that you found out later that that Ethel had some emotional issues. How did you find that out?
Because my mom made a point to say that my one grandmother died, my world got shook, and she said, the version of you and what grandmother you got was different than what we got, and you get the best versions of her. And also, she kept saying, and then there were stories throughout the years around how Aunt Terry took my mother to college, and how my mother lived with Aunt Terry in Queens. And I was like, where's grandma at all the time? She was like, well, grandma wasn't stable, right? She had a hard time keeping a job, had a hard time keeping housing. She had a couple of nervous breakdowns a couple of times. I had an uncle who was in the street for a while and was homeless on drugs, so she's worried about him. So so Ethel was not necessarily stable emotionally, financially, physically to kind of support my mom coming up, and she kind of got better once my mother had me and my cousins and kind of grew up.
So, but what changed? I mean, what
I don't
changed
know.
for her?
I don't know. I never asked her. I didn't know.
I didn't know if she had gotten treatment or.
No, so I don't know. So I think the way they tell this, because they all have some varying level of mental illness. Sometimes it's like depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder. So my grandmother having nervous breakdowns. I didn't see any of this. Right. The Ethel I knew was smart, raised hell, had people scared of her. Like the Ethel I knew was always quick, always on her toes. So this person that I heard about in pieces later was after she died. Right. When she was on Earth, I didn't have that version of her. Right. She smoked cigarettes. She drank rum and coke every day. Like I didn't know any of those things. These stories that I'm telling you now are things that people I've held and kind of acquired in pieces when something goes wrong. Right.
Right.
My mother is sad missing her mom, or my mother is sharing a story around mom. Then I'll get a piece of the story that way. But I never got a complete story because they don't tell complete truths. So I can't get a complete story.
Did they know that you were queer, either one of them or both of them?
So I don't know if Ethel did, because she didn't bring it up, although she made it a point to talk about Baldwin often. She talked about how much she loved Baldwin and how gay he was. Thelma wasn't had a lot more colorful language around people who were gay. And,
do tell.
No, she did because Thelma and neither one of them minced words. Both of them were. Ethel was what we call old battle axe. She was mean and surly, and Thelma was hard and mean as well, but also very loving and generous and funny. So the first person called me a faggot was my grandmother, Grandma Thelma, excuse me. One time we were watching the news, and I don't know if somebody got killed who was gay. Something happened gay related in the news, and she muted the TV and said to me, "If you're gonna be a faggot, be a king first." She said, "Because the world ain't ready for you, and your mother ain't gonna get it. Nobody's gonna be able to handle any of this shit. So if you don't decide who you're gonna be, then we're gonna tell you who you're gonna be every day. So if you're gonna be a faggot, make sure you stand up every day, deciding what you're gonna do."
How did you hear that? Like when she told you that.
What you talking about? What you talking about? I was like, what the hell you talking about?
How old were you?
He was young. He was still young 7. At that point.
He was
a little kid.
Okay.
But she had to know because there was a movie called Fridays, we all know. So there's a scene in the movie Bernie Mac talks about Miss Parker, and Miss Parker, she always used to have me reenact the scene, and I would carry on and switch. So I didn't know she was calling me sweet. I just thought but again, also I grew up silly and like that's so like none of those. I never felt anything but love for my grandmother always, right? And protected and secure. So I didn't think about it until I wanted to say as an adult. Like I want to say 28, 25. I was like, oh, my grandmother's calling me sweet. She's look at some chicken and tank. And
okay.
It really didn't come up when it comes to me being gay.
Okay.
Not until my father got out of jail when I was 12.
Can you talk a little bit about Ethel's? We talked about her being a battle axe, a little hard exterior. What do you
not exterior, a hard mouth? No, and when I say hard, because I remember something I learned as a kid because I lost my grandma was very young when I was 10. People tell stories about the dead in a very beautiful way and leave out parts of who they were. Right? So my grandmothers changed my life. They taught me a lot. They were great women. They also were mean. and not always nice and not always like fun and loving. I enjoyed them. There was a lot of joy that my memories around them. So Thelma was more, we would say, cosmic. Like she was the seer, had premonitions, dream about people. It was always very strange because people would come to her, talk to her. She always know what to say, always know what to do, how to help. Ethel, was 5'4" or 4'11". She was tiny. She was tiny, and took nobody. Took nobody mess. I remember going with her to community board meetings, her raising hell, and not just raising hell for no reason, but like be having a notes and bullet points and like this is what we're gonna talk about. And like, she didn't take anybody's mess. Everybody was always like, oh, here come Ethel, here she come, here she comes. So they had very very strong personalities. And I loved every minute of it. I didn't even feel like, oh my God, here she come. I was like, oh, here she go. Again, look at her go. Look at her go.
So I'm so interested though, Chris. You say that they were both that strong and they got along together. They lived together.
Oh, got along famously. Yeah,
wow.
yeah. Because the thing about people, what I learned or what I've acquired about them is that they knew how to yield, right? So. My grandmother, they also were not mean to people for no reason, right? So people who got the raw, hard parts of them, they asked for it, right?
Okay.
Their threshold, their nah was very, very loud. They also loved very, very loud too.
Chris, how did they come to live together?
So remember, those two families were connected before me, right? So like officially, I am the connection, but I'm not, right? So. They were friends, got together, hung out, did all kind of things.
They were friends because what? They lived on the same block, or they lived in the same
so my mother
neighborhood?
grew up on 121st and 7th, between 7th and 8th Avenue, and my aunt Sue, my father's family grew up on 120th Street between 7th and Lenox in a brownstone. So, and my mother and my aunt Sue on my father's side have been to went to school together. So. These families were connected way before I was around. There are photographs of my aunts as young women, right, like in their 20s and their teens, at my grandma Thelma's house.
Okay.
Thelma has a 5-bedroom apartment in Harlem, or 4-bedroom apartment in Harlem. So when Ethel was on hard times, because she was living in the YMCA in Harlem on 135th Street for a long time. When she was going on hard times, she ended up staying with Thelma. Thelma said, "You stay here." So like, my church has the file of my grandmother's application for her apartment, because the church owns an apartment building next door to the church. And on the apartment, in the folder, you see Thelma's signing off on everything. Right? She lives with me. She pays no rent. Here's a letter saying that she lived with me for this much time. So they were very close. And even after when Ethel died in August, Thelma said for 4 months, "I miss my sister, miss my sister, miss my sister, miss my sister." She kept saying all the time. So yeah, Thelma had cancer, and she had got sick, and I watched her die in the hospital the last 4 months. But they also said that she when Ethel died, she felt like she didn't have any reason to be here anymore, so she was like kind of leaving too. They were very, very close. Very, very close.
Okay. Right.
That's so fascinating.
It is wonderful.
It is and it's not, because I think even like a lot of my extended family or further family, there's all these weird ways I have seen people build family in Harlem. Like Lady Sasha's great. Lady Sasha's grandmother raised all her kids on the same floor as my grandmother on 121st Street. So she didn't know we were in our blood family until she was like 21. So I'm saying, like, so even if Thelma was not my blood grandmother, I called her before I knew she was officially my grandmother when I was 12, 2 years after she died. I still called her my grandmother even before that, right? I was raised with all her daughters, her sisters, so everybody in that family was my family even before I knew I was blood.
Well, I guess that makes sense though, right? So because that's the connection of how your mother knew your father.
Yes. Also, she used to say things like when she was alive, because my father was in jail up until I was 12. So she was like, you look my son. And the older I got, she goes, you favor my son a lot. I think my son's your father. When my father would call to see her, to talk to her on from jail, she would always act like, I think you my son's son. You look my son.
And so did Thelma ever tell you anything about her son? Did she ever like tell you stories to
I met him, and yes, so yes, she did. She said, well, she said,
sort of
my,
develop a connection?
kind of. She's always say things like, oh, my son was silly too, like you. My son have the same hands. My father has big hands. I have big hands. She never brought up in front of my mother though. Never brought up in front of my mother.
Do you have photographs of your grandmothers?
I have a few. My aunt, who lives in my grandmother's old apartment, still has a lot more of them, but she won't give them up. But I have a few.
So I think we're wrapping up. Is there a final thought you have about this
I just
particular?
wish I was older when they passed. I started caring about genealogy and history and stuff in an intentional way in high school, and I wish they would have been around to answer questions that I have asked.
Yeah.
Because my aunts have everybody in my family is a little crazy, and my grandmother's always told complete truths. So had I asked my grandmother, well, who's my mother's father, she would probably have a whole, not only a whole story behind it, but have a name and have a picture or something like that and tell me the story around it in a very clear way without any shadow of shame in it. She, so I just wish I was older to record and document differently. And I'm also very envious of my friends who like grandparents or people who die later. I'm like, y'all had a whole life with them. Like y'all yeah, it still hurts. But I lost everything at 10. So I just wish I was older to be able to have more information about who these people were before I came around.
Well, just thank you very much for coming on the show today. We really appreciate you being so candid and open about your story related to your grandmother's stories and your family stories.
Thank you for having me.
We appreciate you coming on In the Telling, and we want to thank you listeners for taking some time with us today, and we hope that you join us again in a couple of weeks. You can find us wherever you get your podcast. So on behalf of Miranda and Christopher and myself, have a good evening.